Mel, you and I both know, we've talked about it for months now, how great this wide receiver class is. This past week in Indianapolis only reinforced that. I want to ask you a very simple question. After those 1, 2, 3 receivers, and maybe even including those 1, 2, 3 wide receivers, how exactly do you sort through and stack this wide receiver class when you have so many capable players that all feel like they could become legit NFL starters?
That's going to be a tricky part. Field is lining those guys up and figuring it out. Pro days still to come. Information still to be gathered. And we're looking at players every day. And when you get players in a group, 4 or 5 guys in a group that are all bunched together, the numbers will separate those guys, Field. So that is important. Ricky Pearsall is a name I think you have to put up there pretty high. Arizona State, Herm Edwards raves about him. Every time I talk to Herm, what about my boy Ricky Pearsall?
Yeah.
It's Arizona State with me. Well, I remember a lot of great players were at Arizona State with Herm before they moved on somewhere else later in their careers, right? Ricky Pearsall being one of them going to Florida. Is he now a second-round pick? I thought during the year he'd be maybe a third or fourth-round pick. So Ricky Pearsall's name is going to be heavily in that mix. What do you do with a Troy Franklin? You had talked about him being spindly, Field. Do we move him down? What do we do with Keon Coleman, running a 4.62, 4.64, but great in a gauntlet, right? We look like a mid-first rounder during the year in a lot of games. Do you push him into the second round? I had NFL people saying, well, if he ran in the 4.5 range, he's a first-rounder guaranteed, maybe even a mid-first rounder if he runs 4.46. He ran 4.6 and change. Does that move him into the second? They thought going in, if he did, that could move him into the second round. So again, don't guard against overreaction, but use it as a way to separate. And I think right now, Phil, and I'd like to have your number based on your ratings as we speak in real time. I have 26 wide receivers within the first 4 rounds. How many do you have right now?
Okay, so I've done my top 50 mail, or at least it is almost done. It's coming out here on Wednesday on ESPN.com. And I believe the number of receivers that I had in the top 50 alone was 11? Might have been 9. Somewhere between 9 to 11 in the top 50. So the first 4 rounds is about 130 picks when you factor in compensatory picks as well, Mel. So my number probably is going to approach around 25 because here's the debate that I also wrestled with when I was making my top 50 and looking at some of those finals few spots. When I'm debating, is it better for a team to invest in wide receiver 9 or 10 or 11 off the board when you could get the third or fourth best guard off the board, or maybe the best or second best off-ball linebacker, probably the second best off-ball linebacker off the board in that similar range, because those positions are going to drop off so dramatically after the first few players. It is a little bit of like a supply and demand negotiation, but you're absolutely right. It's just a stacked wide receiver class. So I thought about at the top, Mel, and I think that I've been doing this long enough to realize that people love who's 1, who's 2, who's 3, who's 4, who's 5. They love that, right? They want a sequential order from 1 until 26 in the first 4 rounds. But what I'm realizing, Mel, is that we've got 3 at the very top that I think it's like choosing between your favorite pizza joint, right? I think Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., Roma Dunze, kind of in a class unto themselves. And then I think you just get through like mini tiers beyond that, right, Mel? So like when you're stacking up this wide receiver board, I really don't think that the gap between Brian Thomas Jr. and Adonai Mitchell is anything other, Mel, than how does one team see the personality or the football character versus how another team sees it. Or maybe one team has a longtime scout who's been scouting the Texas area who pounds the table and says, we need Adonai Mitchell, and he has a stronger opinion than he does of Brian Thomas Jr. So it feels to me, this wide receiver class, as we're sorting through it, Mel, so much of it is just, what does your offense need? Not so much, this guy is definitively, unquestionably better than this other player.
No question about it, Field, and I think the separation of a group. So if you feel like Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas Jr., Keon Coleman are all bunched together, what do you do there? Do you look at the numbers and say, okay, now I have to bump up Brian Thomas Jr.? I'll bump down Keon Coleman just a bit. Now, he'll have his pro day. We'll see what he runs there. Xavier Worthy with that record 4.21. Like them coming in. Thought he could go late first round. How far up do you move him? Adonai Mitchell. Big, fast, right? Georgia, Texas, did it all. They got the ball to him. Maybe they end up moving on. You think about you go back to games where you say, when you have receivers like that, give them the ball a little more. Bottom line is, I think when you look at Brian Thomas Jr., has the length, 4.33 speed, the ability this year to take a top off of defense, average 17 yards a catch, 17 touchdowns. He was the other receiver at LSU for Jaden Daniels opposite Malik Neighbors. You watch him here. Smooth, deceptive. You know, he lifts his hand. Hey, I'm open. If you're even, you're leaving, right? He was leaving. And this kid had a heck of a season. And there's room to get better. So he has not yet become the receiver Brian Thomas Jr. may be once he gains some more coaching and experience. But me, this is a kid, once you run that 40, and you're as big and as long as he is and as athletic as he is, and you had the production with Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors that he did, keep in mind, this defense couldn't stop anybody. Those receivers had to do their job as well. You see the bump up in production. Is he a one-year wonder? Yeah, but he has the talent, and he did it this year at the highest level, okay? And the fact that he's still not yet the player he could become. You always like that. And I think for me right now, you could make a strong case. I had him in the mock 1.0 going mid-first, bumped him down to the late first when you talk to people. Now I've got to bump him back into the mid-first and mock 3.0 field. So he's the kind of guy really helped his cause. I think you got to look at somebody's going to get lost in the shuffle. Khalil Shakir did a couple years ago when with 2022. Bo Melton did. He went in the 7th round. He's with Green Bay now. Somebody's going to get lost in the shuffle when you have so many receivers being evaluated, as I do, 26 in the first 4 rounds. Somebody's going to drop in the 5th, 6th, 7th round. Turns out to be really good. Maybe 3 or 4 guys drop into day 3 that turn out to be more than just good in the National Football League.
I get the sense, Mel, when we're talking day 3, the morning of that day 3 of the draft, we're going to be talking about all the great receivers who are still available on the board. Not because teams have overlooked them, but because there's just so many others that have already gone in front of them. This wide receiver class is just so astronomically deep. You mentioned Brian Thomas Jr. You also alluded earlier to Ricky Pearsall. Just wanted to quickly sort of close the book on Ricky Pearsall and what you specifically liked the most out of the workout from this weekend.
He just goes against the football field. You know, he's 6'1", he attacks the ball. He's got versatility to line up in a variety of different places. He's got ability after the catch. He plays the game of football like he enjoys contact, that he likes being physical and aggressive and tough. Hits don't bother him. He is a guy feisty, comes to play. Did it at Arizona State, did it at Florida. There's a lot to like about Pearsall when you see how he tests. You see how you compare him to other receivers that we thought were maybe 2nd or 3rd rounders, and he's right there or better. I got to believe 2nd round field, somebody's got. We talked about Cooper Kupp went in the 3rd round. Puka Nacua went in the 5th round. I thought 3rd or 4th round at times during the year. I got to believe 2nd round for him. You talk about what he had done during the course of his career, consistently at 2 different schools getting it done, then test the way he did. I'll give you another kid that I wanted to throw out there as a day 3 guy.
Let's go.
Who could be one of those is Bub Means from Pitt. Bub Means is a good football player. Bub Means did it at 10. He was a cornerback at Tennessee, okay? Then he goes to Louisiana Tech. He develops there, averaged, 19 plus a catch. He's returning kicks. Then he goes to Pitt. He plays with all these different coordinators, different systems, 4 different quarterbacks at Pitt this past year. Put up really good numbers. Watched him beat Jarvis Brownlee at Louisville in a game. I mean, he was taking the top off of defense, had a 75-yard touchdown catch against Virginia Tech. He's 6'1", 212, runs good. He's got big hands and long arms, Field. Bub Means in the 4th round, you think, Field? When we're talking day 3, if he's on that list and on that board, I like that kid.
The other thing I'll remind people about the combine and what it reveals is traits. And people are going to end up drafting traits. The skills and the production and the stats are one part of the equation here, Mel. But at some point, you're making a bet on what this guy can become. Along those lines, the trait, perhaps, that was the story of the weekend was speed at wide receivers. Let's talk about, for a moment, Xavier Worthy from Texas, wide receiver. How much stock do you put into a 4.21 40 quickly before we pivot to his teammate Adonai Mitchell, who I think is kind of right there neck and neck with also Brian Thomas Jr.?
I'll say this about Xavier Worthy. He had the hand injury, remember the broken hand 2 years ago, and he had some drops, but he played through that. And he took some criticism, but he had the injury. And Sark even said, hey, don't forget he was hurt. And he played through it. He never complained. And he goes out there this year and he improves in that area. He's a guy, he's space guy. He can be the guy down the field making plays. You saw the speed. You saw the big playability. You saw how dangerous he was after the catch. You saw he could just leave guys in his wake, okay? Xavier Worthy was in the first round mix before he ran 4.21. We thought he'd run the 4.3s. He ran 4.21, which was amazing. And he's still running. This kid is still running.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, Field, he doesn't, it's not like he's getting this huge, he's not Darius Hayward-Bay, who's going to jump into the top 10. Maybe he could. Maybe he could. But we saw Darius Hayward-Bay jump in the top 10, be more straight line. This guy's more than that, Field. I think he deserves to be in that discussion, in that, I'd say 15 to 25 range. I thought maybe 25 to 32. Maybe you bump him up into the mid to late first round instead of saying he's a late one, early to mid two.
Yeah, I can see that. I can still see the late one, early to mid two, Mel, because I knew he was fast going into the combine, right? It's the size, 165 pounds, that I think is going to be hardest thing for me to overcome, just because that body armor alone, it's going to invite teams trying to press him. Now, you can't press what you can't hit, right? You can't catch up to Xavier Worthy, but size will be what determines, I think, sort of the ceiling for him. Let's go to Keon Coleman, and we'll come back to Adonai Mitchell if time permits. But Keon Coleman, Mel, you and I love Keon Coleman. We've been talking about this a lot on this show. I pounded the table for him in Indianapolis on Thursday before he ran. And then he ran a 4.61 40, Mel. This one's going to drive me bonkers until we get to the draft itself. How much stock do you put into the 4.61 40 that Keon Coleman ran? Or, as you mentioned earlier, the fact that over the past 2 years of Next Gen Stats tracking mile per hour speed during the gauntlet drill for wide receivers, he's the fastest wideout over the past 2 years. What matters more to you?
I like the fact that he did. I'm not the 40th. Puka Nacua ran 4.57, 4.58, whatever it was. Cooper Kupp was 4.62, whatever it was there. Look at him here in contested situations. Look at that hand-eye coordination, right? Look at the way he goes and gets the football as a power forward in basketball would do, okay, getting that rebound. Talk about the fluidity of Keon Coleman. I thought he was quiet in games, so they didn't look at him enough. Johnny Wilson, remember, was on the other side. They had Trey Benson, who, by the way, ran a 4.39 40 at the combine, running the football. So there was other options as well. But Keon Coleman, to me, if he gets into the second round field, I got to jump at the opportunity to get there. Which I said earlier, would you rather have Keon Coleman in the second round or Brian Thomas Jr., Worthy, and in the middle of the first, late first? Keon Coleman's a good football player. And I think we look at Kupp, we look at Nacua. Why are they successful? Because there was something you could hang your hat on. Look at how he ran the gauntlet. I mean, just look at it. Watch him. Watch other guys all over the place, okay? Keon Coleman is a productive, smooth, athletically gifted receiver who will play at a high level in the NFL.
Yeah, I just want to say this quickly about Keon Coleman is, as you and I are doing our exercises, like our top 25 players overall, or our top 50 players overall, or our mock drafts, we are constantly figuring out how do we view these players versus how the league might wind up drafting these players. It pained me to do it, but I had to drop Keon Coleman in my top 50 player overall board, Mel, because the NFL has shown us, like, the idea of drafting a 4.61 wide receiver in the first round is borderline unfathomable in today's NFL, right? So along those lines, if history suggests that 4.61 probably won't put you in the top 32 picks, does that mean that the highest you could rank Keon Coleman is 33 on the overall big board? Logically, the answer is probably yes, Mel, so he's going to wind up being lower on my big board than I would like, but as we close the book on Keon Coleman, I still have a lot of love for him, and I think you feel the exact same way.
I do, and I know we're going to get to Adonai Mitchell. I know Adonai Mitchell, Field, you have strong opinion on the wide receiver from Texas, formerly of Georgia. So he, I think, bumps up into that group, into that first round, and solidifies that where Keon Coleman becomes a bargain, a steal somewhere in the second round.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on Keon Coleman is I've been talking to people in the scouting community. I've been asking them, when we have these players, and Puka Nacua is the most recent and best example, who slide through the cracks and then become stars, what's the common thread? The common thread that a couple people have offered up is those guys have elite football character. They've got the alpha mentality. Keon Coleman does have that alpha mentality. So I'm still going to bet on Keon Coleman becoming a heck of a player